Week 12 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 backs I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So arguably him and Derrick Henry have been the number 1 running back all season long in fantasy football. So last week, Barkley once again went over 140 yards, found the end zone twice in that game versus the Commanders. And this week on the fast track, indoors, Sunday Night Football, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game between the Eagles and the Rams. And I see Saquon going out there once again, having a big game. Number 2, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. Henry, what a season it's been for him already. 1,100 yards on the year, 13 touchdowns on the ground. And this week, a pretty decent matchup at the Los Angeles Chargers. I know their defense has been stout, but versus good offenses, and we saw it last week, you can move the football effectively. And this week, I believe between the Ravens and Angeles Chargers in the Hardball Bowl, this is going to be a high-scoring game, and Derrick Henry obviously is going to be a big part of it. Number 3, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. So a couple weeks back in the lineup, McCaffrey, for the most part, he's looked like his old self, and he's just got to get his legs under him a little bit more. So this week in a big ball game at the Green Bay Packers, the team's going for a wild card spot in the NFC. This is a big game with a lot on the line, I believe, even though it's only week 12 of the season. So Christian McCaffrey, we know he does it all, catch the football out of the backfield, in between the tackles, and he's still one of the more explosive and better backs in the league. Number 4, Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. What a season it's been for him with this Houston Texan team. And Mixon, he missed a few games early in the season, and he's still amongst the league leaders in every stat at the running back position. So this week in a pretty decent matchup versus Tennessee Titans, I think Joe Mixon, he could go out there once again, have a big performance. And this week he's definitely a running back I like. 5, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. Achane, ever since Tua returned to the lineup, he's been putting up big numbers for this Dolphin team, and one of the more talented running backs in all the league. Raheem Mostert, he hasn't been a threat all season long to Achane, and this week in a good matchup versus the Patriots, he's a top 5 option. Number 6, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So Kenneth Walker, we know he's a physical running back in between the tackles. We know he's got good receiving prowess out of the backfield. And this week in a potential high-scoring game versus division rival, the Arizona Cardinals, I think Walker, after coming off a mediocre ball game last week, bounces back with a nice performance in this one. Number 7, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. What another great season it's been for Gibbs in his second year in the NFL. Him and David Montgomery, the best 1-2 combo backfield in all the NFL as well. And this Lion team, they're putting up over 35 points per game over the last month of the season. So this week on the fast track in Indianapolis, it wouldn't be surprising to me if Gibbs breaks a big one. Number 8, Kyren Williams of Los Angeles Rams. So Kyren Williams, he's definitely struggled over the last few weeks, and the numbers have gone down, but rightfully so. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back in the lineup for this Ram team. So this week, Sunday Night Football, potential high-scoring game with Philadelphia coming to town, even though their defense has been great as well over the last few weeks. For Kyren Williams, you've seen it over the last 2 seasons now. There's games out of nowhere, he comes out and he puts up 30 fantasy points. So this week versus Philadelphia, even in a tough matchup, and with the struggles over the last couple weeks, he's definitely a back I can't count out of the top 10. Number 9, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So this week it's going to be a game, most likely they're trailing early and often out of the gate versus this Detroit Lion offense, where they're going to have to pass a lot. But Jonathan Taylor, we know he could do everything. He's a 3-down back. I know last week was a down game at the New York Jets, even though Indianapolis went out there and still scored 28 points in that game. So this week versus Detroit, they want to keep that high-powered offense off the field. I think they're going to run a lot is Indianapolis and run Jonathan Taylor, try to get him 25, 30 touches in this game. Number 10, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. So Josh Jacobs, he's been a workhorse all season long for this Green Bay Packer team, and on volume alone, he's made himself a top 10 back weekly for the most part. So this week, I know San Francisco coming to town. The defense, for the most part, this season's been solid versus the run. But like I said, Jacobs, he's going to work his way into production. And this is still a pass-first offense with Jordan Love, which opens up the running game after he stretches that field. Number 11, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So him and Gibbs, weekly, they're putting up massive fantasy points for the most part. Montgomery, the goal line back, and the bruiser in between the tackles, and Gibbs, the home run hitter and the receiving speedster back. So this week at Indianapolis, I expect Detroit to go out there and at least score 28, 35-point range in this game, and Montgomery be a big part of it. Number 12, J.K. Dobbins of Los Angeles Chargers. So Gus Edwards, I know he returned a couple weeks ago. People were worried that Dobbins was going to lose work, but after last week, he stamped himself as the top back easily in the backfield for this Los Angeles Charger team. 2 touchdowns, including a game winner with under a minute left in that game. And this week versus former team, you know the juices get flowing for any player for the most part versus their former team to put points on the board and have a big game. And I believe Dobbins versus Baltimore could do that in a potential high score. And number 13, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. His numbers have definitely dropped off a little bit over the last couple weeks. Here's Aaron Jones, but he's still a solid back. This week a matchup at the Bears, obviously a team very familiar with, playing in the same division his whole career, where he started with the Green Bay Packers. And this Bear defense is definitely a good unit, especially at Soldier Field this season. But Aaron Jones, he's a good dual threat, and they've even kept him fresh a little bit, where Cam Akers has been getting a little more work over the last few weeks. Number 14, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. Robinson returned last week versus the Eagles. He didn't get a full workload. Well, Austin Eckler was the passing downs, and they were running a lot of two running back sets with Robinson and Eckler in there at the same time, lined up in the backfield. So this week versus the Cowboys, a defense that can't stop anyone. We just saw Joe Mixon go out there and go over 30 fantasy points, over 100 yards on the ground, and 3 touchdowns. I think Robinson could have a good game versus this Cowboy team. 15, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. So Conner, he's been a workhorse all season long. I know Trey Benson, his work's gone up a little bit over the last few weeks, but this week a good matchup at a team he's familiar with, the 12th man at the Seattle Seahawks. And their run defense really hasn't been all that great this season. So I think James Conner could go out there coming off the bye week. This offense was playing well for the majority of the season and have a decent game. 16, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. So Tyrone Tracy, he's been solid, I believe, this rookie year. I know he fumbled that game away in overtime, where the Panthers recovered a couple weeks ago in Munich, Germany, and kicked a field goal to win it. But Tracy, he could catch the football out of the backfield, physical in between the tackles in his rookie season. And this week in a potential high-scoring game versus the Bucs coming to town. Both teams coming off bye. I believe both offenses could go out there and have a good ball game. 17, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. So Swift, the first 4 weeks of the season, didn't do much. And now, ever since then, he's been a solid running back and usually a top 15, 20 option, worst case, for fantasy owners. So this week, I know it's a tough matchup versus Minnesota, one of the better defenses in all pro football. But DeAndre Swift, it just takes one big run for him to have a day. And we saw last week, we took a 40-yard touchdown to the end zone. So this week versus Minnesota, in a game, it's going to be a grinded-out type of ball game between these two division rivals in the NFC North. I think DeAndre Swift, once again, has a decent performance. 18, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. It's definitely a tough matchup with the Kansas City Chiefs coming to town. One of the better defenses, obviously, in all pro football. I know last week the defense didn't look good, but that was the Buffalo Bills. So Chuba Hubbard, he got rewarded a big contract. He's coming off a 150-yard game a couple weeks ago versus the New York Giants. But this week it's going to be tough sledding. And also I think Jonathan Brooks, we're going to see him get some work in this game as well. 19, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So Stevenson, he's been the workhorse all season long. Antonio Gibson hasn't been a threat to his workload. The only thing, he's not catching the football a lot out of the backfield this season. He has Stevenson. And ever since Drake May has got into the starting lineup, his touches per game have gone down just a bit. This week in Miami, though, division game, you know, anything goes in these division games around the league, where we've seen guys go off and have big games versus familiar defenses. So Stevenson, I think this week, is a number 2 back for owners, is still a solid option at a middle-of-the-pack Miami defense. 20, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Najee Harris, it's been a pretty decent year for him. And this Steelers team, one of the best teams in the league. So ever since Russell Wilson's been in the lineup, Harris's numbers have definitely gone up over the last month of the season. So this week, a pretty decent matchup at the Cleveland Browns. Their defense hasn't been good all season long, surprisingly, where last season they were one of the best defenses in the league. And Thursday nights, we know it's usually high-scoring games, even though this is a division game. 21, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. Tony Pollard, it's been a solid bounce-back year in his first season with the Titans. Tajay Spears in concussion protocol. We'll see if he plays in this game or not for this Tennessee Titan team. But this week, it's definitely a tough matchup at the Texans. One of the better defenses, especially over the last couple weeks, bottling up offenses and running games not really going. But Tony Pollard's a dual threat out of the backfield. Then he's got that home run ability as well. So this week at Houston, even in not a great matchup, I think he could go out there and be a decent option for owners. 22, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Pacheco, I want to see what the work's going to be for him in this game. So I got him a little low in this list. And I think him and Kareem Hunt's going to be a 50-50, 60-40 split in possibly Pacheco's favor in this game. So this week, it's a good matchup to ease him back in at the Carolina Panthers, a defense that obviously can't stop anyone. And Pacheco had a great season last year. He got off to a hot start in the beginning of the season, and then the leg injury did him in, but now he's back And I think this week at Carolina, he still could be a decent option for fantasy owners. 23, Rachaad White. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a great matchup this week at the Giants. Rachaad White, one of the best receiving backs in all the league and amongst the league leaders in receiving touchdowns. And this week, this could be a potential high-scoring game. Both teams coming off bye in Tampa Bay and this Giant team. And now with Mike Evans most likely back in the lineup this week here, it opens up the running game a little bit more as well. So Rachaad White, like I said, he's one of the best receiving backs in the league. I know in between the tackles, he's not a great running back in yards per carry, but he's definitely been better over the last couple weeks. 24, his teammate Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Bucky Irving, he's been a solid back this season in his rookie year, physical in between the tackles. And I've said this a lot, that he's a better back in between the tackles than White. And White's a better, obviously, third down and passing downs back. So this week in New York, I think Bucky Irvin's going to carve out a decent ball game once again. And the solid number 2 back for owners, 25, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Kareem Hunt, he's filled in well, obviously, for Isaiah Pacheco. And this week, a good matchup at Carolina. But I think Pacheco and Hunt, this could be a 60-40, 50-50 split, like I said. But Kareem Hunt, we saw it over the last few seasons where he was the backup, but still getting work with Nick Chubb in that Cleveland Brown backfield. And this week and this rest of the way, if Pacheco's healthy enough, I think he'll play a similar role for now. 26, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Williams last week emerged once again as the lead back for this Denver Bronco team. But every week with Sean Payton, we just don't know who's going to be the lead back. 1 week it's Estime, 1 week it's Williams, 1 week it might be Jaleel McLaughlin, but this week a good matchup at the Vegas Raiders, a defense that can't stop anyone. Saw Achane go out there last week, have a monster performance, and I think Williams, as a back-end RB2 flex option, could have a decent game. 27, Austin Ekeler, the Washington Commanders. Ekeler, he worked in 2 running back sets a lot last week. He had 17.60 fantasy points in PPR league, so maybe they're trying to add him as an easy weapon out of the backfield on wheel routes, out routes, and little seam routes here for Austin Ekeler. And Austin Ekeler, he's been one of the best receiving backs in the league over the last 4 or 5 seasons with the Los Angeles Chargers, and even this season with his Commander team. So this week, a great matchup versus a Cowboy defense that can't stop anyone all season long. And I think Ekeler is a decent flex option for fantasy owners. 28, Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns, still getting his legs under him. A bad offensive line, obviously protecting Chubb and Jameis Winston. And this team trails early and often, and we know Nick Chubb is not a good receiver out of the backfield. So this week in a division game, I think Cleveland, they're going to try to grind it out. And Nick Chubb's going to get a lot of touches in this game, I believe. But I'm not sure it's going to lead to a lot of production. But still, as a flex option, I think he could be an okay option. 29, Cam Akers of the Minnesota Vikings. So like I said, Cam Akers, he's getting more work as the weeks go on. And I think this Viking team, they're trying to keep Aaron Jones a little fresh. And he definitely had an injury scare a couple weeks ago for this Minnesota Viking team. So Cam Akers, they traded for him a few weeks ago. Obviously, he knows the playbook where he was at last season. And then when Joe Mixon returned for the Texans, they didn't need him. So this week, it's a tougher matchup at Soldier Field. But I think Akers, on 10, 12 touches a week, we saw him vulture a touchdown last week, could be productive in 12-team leagues or deeper. 30, Rico Dottle of the Dallas Cowboys. So this Cowboy offense, it's been horrible over the last few weeks since Dak Prescott has been out for the season with the hamstring. But to be honest, it wasn't that good even with Dak in the line. A week, a tough matchup at the Commanders. Obviously, Dan Quinn, the head coach of this Washington team, and he knows how this Cowboy offense operates. So this week, it's going to be tough sledding once again, I believe, for Dottle. 31, Jalen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this week, a decent matchup at the Browns. The last couple weeks, his work's gone up, is Jalen Warren. But the numbers just haven't been there, and he's been nicked up all season long as Warren. So Najee Harris, it's been a solid year for him. But Warren, we know he's a good change of pace and passing down receiving back for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. So this week at the Cleveland Browns, I think he could go out there. I think he could have a decent ball game, but he's nothing more than a flex option in deeper leagues. 32, Roschon Johnson of the Chicago Bears. So Roschon Johnson, he's been the goal line back over the last couple weeks for the Chicago Bear team. But obviously, you got to count on him plopping into the end zone for a goal line touchdown to have any production, because it's pretty much 30, 40-yard line touchdown for him to put up a decent fantasy day. So this week versus Minnesota, it could be a game that trail in early and often. And he's maybe a little bit of a better receiving back than DeAndre Swift is Roschon Johnson. So it's pretty close. 33, Justice Hill of the Baltimore Ravens. So Hill, good receiving back out of the backfield. And this week, obviously, could be a potential high-scoring game at the Chargers. On the fast track last week, high scorer, 34-27 victory versus the Bengals. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if this game is similar between these two teams. And Justice Hill, we know he's the third down back and all passing downs back, with Henry obviously being the bruiser in between the tackles and the workhorse. But Hill, we've seen times this season in these high-scoring games, get a lot of touches and catch a decent amount of passes out of the backfield. So this week at the Chargers could be a 10 to 12 touch game. 34 Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals. So Benson, he's starting to get more work in the backfield behind James Conner. And I say this a lot in the videos. After the bye week, rookies get more playing time. They get into the playbook more. And this week in a big division ball game at the Seattle Seahawks, I think Trey Benson, he could get 8 to 10 touch range and possibly put up some decent numbers. 35 Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. So Nick Chubb, we know he's not a passing downs back at all. And this Cleveland team most likely is going to be trailing in this one versus the Pittsburgh Steelers on Thursday night. So Ford, last week he had an all-right game, 7.90 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And we've seen some decent games out of Ford over the last season and change. So this week versus Pittsburgh, if you're in desperation mode and counting at least someone in PPR leagues who could go out there and catch a couple passes and get a few carries, I think that's what Ford could do this week. And the 36th and final back I'm ranking is Jonathan Brooks, his NFL debut versus the Kansas City Chiefs. So Chuba Hubbard, obviously the lead back, got a 4-year extension a couple weeks ago from this Carolina Panther team. And I know Jonathan Brooks was a second-round pick, but they're going to ease him in. They're 3-7. They don't want him injured, obviously, where he's going to miss some time next season if it's a bad injury. So I think Jonathan Brooks, he'll get eased in, but he's definitely a running back that's going to get touches as the week goes on. So this week versus the Kansas City Chiefs, maybe he'll get 5-7 touches in this game as Jonathan Brooks. And we know he was the best running back in college football, even with the ACL coming out this season. So that's a top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.